I arrived at the gym earlier than usual, deciding to surprise Kim after her training session. The evening was still young, and the lights in the hall gave off a soft, welcoming glow. I walked through the familiar glass doors, the scent of sweat and rubber filling the air, a reminder of the hours Kim spent here, sculpting her body and mind. As I waited in the lobby, I glanced at my watch. I was about 15 minutes early. Perfect, I thought. She'll be pleasantly surprised. I took a seat on one of the benches, close to the large mirror that ran along the entire length of the wall, and casually looked around. The gym was mostly empty, the few people still working out lost in their routines. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a movement in the mirror. I saw Kim, but she wasn't alone. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed her trainer standing behind her. At first, I thought he was simply giving her some last-minute pointers. But then, his hand moved to her waist, and before I could process what was happening, he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. My heart pounded in my chest, a deafening drumbeat that drowned out all rational thought. I blinked, hoping I had imagined it, but the reflection in the mirror remained the same, as clear and undeniable as the pain that began to spread through my chest. I watched in stunned silence as they held each other for what felt like an eternity, though it could have only been a few seconds. The world around me seemed to blur, the sounds of the gym fading into the background as my mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The man I had trusted to guide my wife in her fitness journey, the man she spoke of so often, was now holding her in a way that only I should. My hands clenched into fists, knuckles turning white as a wave of nausea hit me. I wanted to look away, to tear my eyes from the sight that was shattering my reality, but I couldn't. It was like a bad dream, one where you know you should wake up, but you're trapped, forced to witness every agonizing second. Kim finally pulled away, a smile on her lips, and I felt something inside me break. I had come here to surprise her, to share a moment of happiness, but what I found instead was a betrayal so deep that it threatened to consume me. The reflection in the mirror was all too real, and as I sat there, paralyzed by shock and disbelief, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Sitting in the car outside the gym, I felt the cold steering wheel beneath my hands as the shock of what I had just witnessed slowly began to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. My thoughts raced, replaying the moment over and over as if my mind refused to accept the reality of what I had seen. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't deny the truth. Kim had been distant lately, but I had chalked it up to stress or fatigue. She often stayed late after her workouts, claiming she needed extra time to cool down or stretch. At first, I didn't think much of it. I trusted her, and I wanted to believe she was simply dedicated to her fitness goals. But now, in the harsh light of what I had just seen, those little moments started to take on a different meaning. There were nights when she'd come home late, her hair damp from a shower she said she took at the gym. "It's quicker this way," she would say with a tired smile. I remember how she'd often decline my offers to pick her up, insisting that she liked the time alone to unwind. Then there were the messages. She'd sometimes get texts late at night, and when I asked who it was, she'd casually reply, "Just something from the gym." I never questioned it. Why would I? We had always been open with each other, or so I thought. But now, every one of those instances played back in my mind, and they all pointed to the same devastating conclusion. I thought about the times she'd seemed unusually happy, her mood brightened after a workout. She'd tell me about the new exercises her trainer had introduced, and how much he was helping her. There was an admiration in her voice when she spoke of him, a respect I didn't find odd at the time. But now, knowing what I knew, it was like a dagger twisting in my gut. Even the small things, like the way she'd rush to check her phone whenever it buzzed or the extra care she started taking with her appearance before heading to the gym, suddenly made sense. I had dismissed them all as insignificant, too trusting, or perhaps too blind to see what was happening right in front of me. The betrayal cut deeper with each memory that surfaced. How had I not seen it? How had I let myself be so easily deceived? The woman I loved, the woman I had promised to spend my life with, had been lying to me, carrying on this affair behind my back. And I, like a fool, had believed every word, never doubting her for a second. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Kim hadn't just been staying late at the gym for extra training, she had been staying late for him. Every minute she spent away from me, she was with him, laughing, smiling, sharing moments that should have been ours. The thought made my stomach churn with a sickening mix of anger and heartbreak. As the memories continued to flood my mind, I felt something harden inside me. The pain was still there, a raw wound that throbbed with every beat of my heart, but it was beginning to transform into something else. Something darker. Confronting Kim right away would have been easy. I could have stormed in, thrown accusations, demanded explanations, and let the storm of emotions tear through our lives. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to just vent my anger or to hear her apologies, which I knew would be hollow. No, I wanted something deeper, something that would make them both feel the weight of what they had done. So, I decided to bide my time. Instead of confronting her, I put on a mask of normalcy. I needed to think, to plan my next steps carefully. Each time I looked at her, the anger and betrayal boiled inside me, but I forced it down. This wasn't the time to let emotions dictate my actions. If I wanted to truly make them pay, I needed to be cold and calculated. I started to picture it in my mind, a plan that would hit them both where it hurt the most. And that meant going after him first. I would strike at the core of his life, unravel everything he held dear, and watch as it all crumbled around him. Kim would feel the sting of losing her lover, but more importantly, she would see the depths of the man she had betrayed. I began by outlining my objectives. What did I want to achieve? Ruin him professionally? Yes. Destroy his personal life? Absolutely. I needed to make sure that when I was done, he would have nothing left. But I couldn't do it all at once. It had to be subtle, a series of calculated moves that would slowly tighten the noose around his neck. I thought about the ways I could reach him, the weaknesses I could exploit. Every man has his vulnerabilities, and I was determined to find his. I considered every angle, every potential outcome. This wouldn't be a reckless act of revenge, it would be a meticulously orchestrated downfall. As the plan began to take shape, I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. I wasn't just going to confront him, I was going to dismantle his life, piece by piece. And all the while, Kim would be oblivious, thinking that her secret was safe, that I was none the wiser. But in the end, they would both learn the truth. They would both feel the sting of betrayal, not just as I had felt it, but in a way that would leave them broken and humiliated. This wasn't just revenge, this was justice. My justice. And so, I waited, all the while carefully planning the steps I would take to destroy him. I was patient and methodical, and as the days passed, I could almost taste the satisfaction of seeing him brought to his knees. Once I had committed to my plan, my first objective was simple: gather information. Knowledge is power, and if I was going to take him down, I needed to know everything about him. His routines, his relationships, his weaknesses, nothing could be left to chance. I started by keeping a close eye on him whenever I could. It wasn't difficult to find opportunities, after all. He worked at the gym where Kim trained, a place I could visit without raising any suspicion. I'd arrive early or linger after my workouts, observing him from a distance. I noted the times he arrived, when he left, who he spoke to, and how he interacted with others. He was well-liked, easygoing, with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. But I wasn't fooled by his outward charm. There was always something beneath the surface, and I intended to find it. Over time, I began to see patterns in his behavior. He had his regular clients, mostly women who adored him, but there were also a few men, wealthy, successful types who seemed to value his advice beyond just fitness. He was more than just a trainer, he was a confidant, someone who made people feel good about themselves. That was his strength, and I knew that his downfall would have to attack that very quality. But it wasn't until I overheard a conversation between him and one of his clients that I stumbled upon the most crucial piece of information. They were talking about his new venture, a small fitness studio he had recently opened in another part of town. It was clear that he was proud of it, but I could hear the strain in his voice when he talked about the financial side of things. That night, I dug deeper. A quick search online confirmed that he had indeed opened a boutique fitness studio, a sleek, modern place that catered to an upscale clientele. It was supposed to be his big break, his step up from being just another personal trainer. But there were signs that all wasn't well. Reviews mentioned high prices, and the studio's social media presence, though polished, was sparse in terms of engagement. There was an air of desperation in the way they promoted special offers and discounts. The more I looked, the clearer it became. He had taken out a significant loan to fund this venture, one that far exceeded what a personal trainer could comfortably afford. He was betting everything on this studio, and if it failed, so would he. His entire financial future was tied up in this one business, and any disruption could send it spiraling out of control. This was the crack I had been searching for, his vulnerability laid bare. He had overextended himself, and I could use that to my advantage. All it would take was a push, the right nudge at the right time, and his carefully constructed life would come crashing down. I spent the next few days gathering more information, verifying the extent of his debts, and tracking the studio's progress. It was all there in the public records, plain as day. Late payments, a strained relationship with his suppliers, and growing pressure to make his business succeed in a crowded market. I had found his weakness, and now it was time to exploit it. But I needed to be careful, to make sure that when the moment came, there would be no escape for him. I didn't want him to just suffer, I wanted to see him destroyed, to watch as the life he had built crumbled into dust. All the while, Kim continued to go about her days, oblivious to the storm that was about to break over her lover's head. After uncovering the cracks in his life, I knew the next step was to get close to him, close enough that he would let his guard down, never suspecting that the man he was beginning to trust was the same one plotting his downfall. The best way to do that was to insert myself into his life as someone he could rely on, someone he might even consider a friend. I signed up for the gym where he worked, making it seem like a natural decision, just another guy looking to get in shape. When I walked in that first day, he greeted me with the same professional enthusiasm he showed to all his clients. I played my part perfectly, expressing a genuine interest in his methods, asking questions about my own fitness goals, and subtly praising his expertise. It wasn't long before I became one of his regulars. We started small, with casual conversations between sets. I talked about my life, carefully crafted stories, half-truths that painted me as a successful but slightly stressed man looking to improve his health. He responded in kind, sharing details about his life, his passion for fitness, and eventually, about the struggles of running his new studio. I pretended to be impressed by his ambitions, nodding along as he spoke about the challenges of balancing his time between the gym and his business. I could see the fatigue in his eyes, the weight of the responsibilities he had taken on. It wasn't long before he started to open up more, letting slip just how much pressure he was under. This was my opportunity. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, I made my move. We were sitting in the locker room, cooling down and chatting. I steered the conversation toward finances, mentioning how I had some experience in investments. I talked about the stock market, real estate, and how I had made a few lucrative deals in the past. His interest was piqued, just as I had hoped. "You know," I said casually, "there are always ways to make a quick buck if you know where to look. Sometimes, all it takes is the right investment at the right time. If you're ever interested, I might be able to point you in the right direction." He looked at me, curiosity mixed with a hint of desperation. "Really? That's interesting. I've been trying to figure out how to bring in more income with this studio, but it's tough. I could use some advice." I smiled as if considering his situation. "You know, I've been thinking about expanding my investments. If you're open to it, we could look into something together. There are always opportunities out there. And with your drive and my experience, we could make something happen." He hesitated for a moment, clearly torn between caution and the lure of an easy solution to his problems. But in the end, the strain of his debts won out. He agreed to meet with me later in the week to discuss it further, eager to hear more about the opportunities I was hinting at. It was almost too easy. He was walking right into my trap, blinded by the promise of financial relief. He had no idea that I was leading him to his ruin. Over the next few days, we met several times outside the gym. I continued to build the facade of a trustworthy, knowledgeable friend who just wanted to help. I talked about potential investments, throwing out terms and figures that sounded impressive but were carefully designed to lead him down the path I had laid out. He was hooked, seeing me as a lifeline during his financial troubles. Finally, I presented him with an offer, an investment opportunity that seemed too good to pass up. I made it sound legitimate, weaving in enough real details to make it convincing, but in reality, it was nothing more than a carefully crafted scheme, designed to make him take a fall. He was eager to get started, thanking me for my generosity and for believing in him. I nodded, pretending to share in his excitement, but inside, I felt only cold satisfaction. He had no idea what was coming. I left our meeting that day knowing that the trap was set, and it was only a matter of time before it snapped shut. All that was left was to watch as he unknowingly walked deeper into the web I had spun around him, dragging himself closer to the point of no return. With the groundwork laid and the trainer firmly ensnared in my web, it was time to execute the final phase of my plan. The idea of a simple financial ruin wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel the weight of true despair, to lose not just his business but his reputation, his freedom, and everything he had worked so hard to build. That's when the idea of framing him for a crime came to mind, a crime that would ruin him utterly. I spent weeks planning every detail of the operation. I needed to be meticulous, ensuring that nothing could be traced back to me. I watched him closely, learning his routines outside of the gym, where he lived, and what places he frequented. I knew that to make this work, I had to make the crime fit his profile, something believable, something that would raise no doubts in the minds of those who knew him. The plan was simple in its elegance, a robbery at his fitness studio. But this wouldn't be just any robbery. It would be designed to look like an inside job. My goal was to create enough circumstantial evidence to cast suspicion squarely on him, leaving him with no way to prove his innocence. First, I needed to gather some items that would link him to the scene. A set of fingerprints, a personal item or two that could be planted where they do the most damage. I managed to acquire a pair of his gloves, which he often left in his locker at the gym. I also took one of his key fobs during the training session, careful to replace it with a replica so he wouldn't notice it missing. Next, I chose the date and time carefully. It had to be a night when he would have no alibi, a night when he was supposed to be home alone, resting after a long day. I chose a weekend, knowing that he often took Sundays off, spending the day catching up on errands or just unwinding. The studio would be empty, the perfect setting for a crime with no witnesses. When the night came, I dressed in dark clothing, gloves on, face obscured, and made my way to the studio. Breaking in was easy with the key fob I had stolen from him, and once inside, I began the process of staging the robbery. I scattered some equipment around, opened the cash drawer, and made it look as though someone had gone through the office, searching for valuables. But the pièce de résistance was what I left behind, his gloves, which I placed carefully in the back room as if they had been dropped in haste. I wiped down everything I touched, making sure that only his fingerprints would be found on the items I had planted. I even went as far as to leave a few strands of hair near the door, knowing that they could be matched to him later. Once everything was in place, I made my exit, ensuring that no cameras caught me coming or going. The gym's security system was outdated, and I knew it wouldn't be long before someone noticed the break-in. When they did, the evidence would be damning. The news spread like wildfire through the gym and beyond. Within days, the once bustling fitness studio was a ghost of its former self. The scandal had captured the attention of the media, and the police had moved in swiftly. The trainer, now the prime suspect in the robbery, faced a barrage of accusations and scrutiny. I watched from a distance, feigning concern and sympathy while inside, I felt a grim satisfaction. The evidence I had meticulously planted was working its dark magic. The trainer's life was unraveling, and he was powerless to stop it. One morning, the gym was abuzz with rumors. The trainer's arrest had been the talk of the town, and the news had already made its way to the local papers. I overheard snippets of conversations as I worked out, people talking about his financial troubles, his failed business, and the shocking revelation of his arrest. It was exactly what I had hoped for, the public disgrace and the slow but inevitable collapse of his world. As the police arrived at the studio, the scene was chaotic. They were thorough, combing through every inch of the place for further evidence. The trainer, handcuffed and escorted out, looked a shadow of the confident man he once was. His face, usually so composed and charismatic, was now etched with confusion and despair. His pleas of innocence were drowned out by the mounting evidence and the growing public condemnation. The gym's owner, once a supporter of the trainer, was quick to distance himself from the scandal. The studio's reputation was in tatters, and clients began to drop off like flies. The once thriving business was now a sinking ship, its financial troubles compounded by the negative press and the loss of loyal customers. The trainer's personal and professional life was in shambles within a week. He had been suspended from his position at the gym, and the legal battles over the theft were beginning to take their toll. The mounting legal fees, combined with the loss of income, were pushing him further into financial ruin. He struggled to maintain any semblance of normalcy. But the weight of the accusations and the collapse of his business proved too overwhelming. The whispers of his downfall eventually reached Kim. I could see the confusion and the pain in her eyes as she tried to make sense of the situation. She had always been so confident in her ability to manage her life, but now she was caught in the crossfire of a scandal she hadn't seen coming. The trainer's arrest and the subsequent unraveling of his business cast a long shadow over her world. Kim tried to reach out to him, but the walls were closing in. The more she learned about the situation, the more she realized how deep the betrayal ran. She saw the fallout not just from a distance but in her daily life, as the scandal seeped into her sphere. The man she had chosen over her marriage was now a cautionary tale of failure and disgrace. And as I watched it all unfold, I felt a cold sense of satisfaction. The man who had taken something precious from me was now paying the price. His world had crumbled under the weight of the deception I had so carefully engineered. Kim was left to face the reality of her choices, and I remained the silent architect of the chaos that had engulfed them both. For now, I kept my distance, maintaining the facade of normalcy. The pain of betrayal was still fresh, but seeing him brought low provided a twisted sense of justice. In the end, the cost of his betrayal was more than just a lost business. It was a life shattered and a reputation destroyed. The days dragged on, and the trainer's world continued to crumble. Each morning, he woke up to find his situation deteriorating further. The studio, once a beacon of his ambition, was now a symbol of his downfall. The few loyal clients he had left were abandoning him, their trust shattered by the scandal. His phone rang incessantly, but it was no longer the calls of interested clients or potential business partners. Instead, it was creditors and lawyers demanding payment for mounting debts. The once proud trainer, who had projected confidence and success, now moved through his days with a palpable air of defeat. The media frenzy had painted him as a criminal, and the courts were swiftly moving towards a conviction. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and despite his insistence on innocence, it was clear that the public had already judged him guilty. His arrest had caused a rift in his personal life as well. Kim, who had once been his confidant and partner, seemed like a distant memory. The trainer barely had the strength to acknowledge her existence, let alone offer her the attention or comfort she sought. His every waking moment was consumed by the relentless pressures of his legal battles and the constant threat of losing everything he had worked for. Kim had tried to reach out, hoping to provide some support or perhaps salvage what remained of their relationship. She called, sent messages, and even showed up at his door. But he was too engulfed in his despair to give her any meaningful response. The weight of his situation left him isolated, unable to offer her the reassurance or love she sought. Every encounter with Kim was met with cold detachment or, at best, an exhausted nod. He no longer had the energy or the emotional capacity to deal with her distress. His focus was entirely consumed by the crisis at hand. He felt betrayed not only by me but by the world that seemed to have turned against him. The studio's closing meant he had no haven, no place where he could escape from the mounting pressure and hopelessness. In his small, cluttered apartment, surrounded by piles of legal documents and overdue bills, the trainer sank deeper into a state of despondency. The reality of his situation was brutal and unrelenting. The shame of his arrest, the loss of his business, and the unending financial stress formed a heavy burden that he could no longer bear. Kim's presence, once a source of comfort and joy, was now a painful reminder of his failures. Her attempts to reach him felt like futile gestures against the backdrop of his crumbling world. He couldn't bring himself to explain or justify his actions, nor could he muster the strength to provide her with any answers. The trainer's life had become a series of bleak, repetitive days filled with court dates, mounting legal fees, and the persistent buzz of bad news. His initial defiance had given way to a quiet resignation as he faced the harsh reality of his situation. The dream he had so passionately pursued had turned into a nightmare, and he was left grappling with the bitter consequences of his choices. As Kim's attempts to reconnect faltered, the trainer's sense of isolation grew. He was trapped in a cycle of despair, unable to reach out or rebuild what had been lost. His world had collapsed under the weight of his actions, leaving him with nothing but the bitter taste of regret and the gnawing realization that his life would never be the same. The weight of my actions pressed heavily on me as I watched the trainer's world unravel. Yet, in the quiet moments between the chaos, my mind drifted back to a time when my life was different. When the pain of betrayal and the mess of revenge seemed distant, and when Kim and I had shared a happiness that now felt almost foreign. I found myself sifting through old photographs, letters, and mementos, things I had once stored away in a dusty corner of my mind. Each image was a snapshot of a time when our smiles were genuine, our laughter came easily, and our love felt unbreakable. We had been so young, so full of promise. I remembered how we would talk for hours about our dreams, how we would spend weekends exploring new places or simply enjoying each other's company. I recalled the first time I saw her, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her passions, the way she made me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered. Those early days were filled with hope and joy, with the kind of love that makes you believe in forever. But as the years passed, things change. Life happened, jobs, responsibilities, and the slow drift that comes with time. We became comfortable and settled into routines, and somewhere along the way, the sparkle in our relationship dimmed. I had been so focused on my ambitions, on my path, that I failed to notice the subtle shifts in her demeanor, the quiet withdrawal. Now, looking back, I could see it all so clearly. Kim had started to seek something more, something that I couldn't provide. She had lost herself in the pursuit of new experiences and new connections. And the trainer, he was just a part of that search. A temporary distraction that had ultimately led to her unraveling. It wasn't just her love that had faded, it was a part of herself that she had lost along the way. She had given so much of herself to the trainer, perhaps hoping to find something missing in our relationship, only to end up in a situation where everything she had sought was now slipping away. I felt a pang of sorrow as I realized that Kim had lost more than just a lover, she had lost a sense of who she was. Her quest for fulfillment had led her to betray not just me but also herself. In her search for something more, she had ended up in a place of emptiness and regret, just like the trainer who had now become a shadow of his former self. The realization was bittersweet. I had been so focused on my revenge, on the satisfaction of seeing him pay for his betrayal, that I had overlooked the profound impact this had on Kim. She had been caught in a spiral of seeking and losing, and now she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her choices. As I reflected on our past, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. Anger at the way things had turned out, at how easily we had let go of what was once so precious. Sadness for the person she had become, for the love that had faded into something unrecognizable. In the end, I realized that my quest for revenge had done more than just destroy the trainer's life. It had also exposed the cracks in my own. The love I had once cherished was now a memory, and I was left grappling with the consequences of my actions. Kim had lost her way. And in the process, so had I. It was a cold evening when Kim finally came to me, her eyes red and her voice trembling with a mix of fear and desperation. The weight of her actions had become too much for her to bear. I had expected a confrontation at some point, but the rawness of her confession took me by surprise. She stood in front of me, her face pale and her shoulders hunched as if the world had already begun to crumble around her. The trainer's downfall had left its mark on her. And now she was here, looking for absolution in the ruins of what we once had. "Frank," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you. There's something I have to say." I nodded, my expression is carefully neutral. "Go on." She took a deep breath, the words spilling out in a rush. I've been unfaithful. I've been seeing the trainer. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I thought it was what I needed, but I see now how wrong I was. I'm so sorry. The confession hit me like a punch to the gut, but I masked my reaction, choosing instead to listen with an inscrutable expression. She continued, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I've cut ties with him," she said. "I've ended everything. I know I've hurt you beyond words, but I want to make things right. I want to start over, to fix what's broken. Please, Frank, please forgive me. I'll do whatever it takes." Her plea was heart-wrenching, a stark contrast to the confident and sometimes indifferent woman I had known. It was clear that she was truly remorseful, but whether her remorse was genuine or simply a reaction to her crumbling world was something I needed to discern. I took my time before responding, letting the silence stretch between us. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, but also a reluctant spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could salvage something from the wreckage. "Kim," I said finally, my voice steady but cold, "I appreciate your honesty. And I want you to know that I'm willing to consider what you're asking. But I need to know how far you're willing to go to prove that this is more than just words." I need to see that you're committed to fixing what's been broken. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and apprehension. I'll do anything, Frank. I swear it. Just tell me what you need from me. I nodded, making a mental note of her words. All right, we'll start with this. You'll need to prove to me that you're truly dedicated to repairing our relationship. It's not enough to just end things with him. You need to demonstrate that you're committed to our marriage in every way. Kim nodded vigorously, her face a mask of determination and fear. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. The days that followed Kim's earnest plea for reconciliation were filled with tense uncertainty. I played my part with careful detachment, observing her every move, and evaluating her sincerity with a cold, clinical eye. She did everything I asked, from severing all connections with the trainer to making grand gestures of commitment. Yet, beneath my calm exterior, I was formulating the final step of my plan. Kim's efforts seemed genuine on the surface. She was attentive, considerate, and determined to prove her love. She attended counseling sessions, made efforts to rekindle the emotional connection we once shared, and avoided any behavior that might hint at a lingering attachment to the trainer. Despite her attempts, I could sense a subtle undercurrent of desperation in her actions. The turning point came one evening when we were alone in the house. Kim had prepared a special dinner, hoping to create a moment of intimacy and connection. As we sat across from each other, the table was set with candles and a carefully prepared meal. I could see the hope in her eyes, the yearning for a reconciliation that, in her mind, was just a step away. As we ate, I let the conversation flow, discussing mundane topics and engaging in small talk. It was a delicate balance of normalcy and tension, with each word carefully measured. Finally, as the meal drew to a close, I decided it was time to confront the reality of the situation. Kim, I began, my voice steady and deliberate, there's something I need to tell you. She looked up, her eyes searching mine for any sign of what was coming. What is it, Frank? Is everything all right? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to reveal. I've been watching you closely over the past few weeks, observing your attempts to rebuild our relationship. I've seen your efforts and your sincerity. And I appreciate them, but there's something you don't know. Kim's expression shifted from hope to confusion. What do you mean? What's going on? I met her gaze, my expression a mixture of resolve and detachment. I know about the trainer, Kim. Not just from what you've told me, but from something more. I orchestrated everything, the downfall of his business, the scandal, his arrest. It was all part of my plan for revenge. Her face went pale, and she stumbled back in her chair, her eyes wide with shock. What are you saying? You did all this? I nodded slowly, feeling a grim satisfaction at the look of disbelief and horror that crossed her face. Yes, I did. I wanted you to see the consequences of your actions, to understand the depth of betrayal that you caused. And now, here we are. Kim was silent for a moment, her mind struggling to process the revelation. But why, Frank? Why go to such lengths? I leaned forward, my voice calm but unwavering. Because I wanted you to understand. Your attempts to win me back were noble, but they were based on a foundation of deceit and pain. I needed you to see that the love you're trying to revive is not the same as it once was. It's been tainted by betrayal and manipulation. Tears welled up in her eyes as she struggled to form a coherent response. I didn't know it was you. I thought I could make things right. You can't, I said, my tone final. The damage has been done, and no amount of remorse can undo it. Your efforts to restore our relationship were in vain. I've seen enough to know that we can't go back to what we once had. Kim's shoulders slumped as the reality of my words sank in. The hope she had clung to now seemed like a distant dream, shattered by the truth I had revealed. She sat there, silent and defeated, as the weight of her actions and the extent of my revenge collided in a devastating realization. As the silence settled between us, I felt a mixture of emptiness and relief. The finality of the moment marked the end of a chapter that had been marred by deceit and retribution. Kim's attempts to mend what was broken were now rendered meaningless, and the path forward was one of closure rather than reconciliation. I watched as Kim gathered herself, her face a mask of anguish and acceptance. The journey that had begun with betrayal and revenge had reached its culmination, leaving both of us to face the consequences of our actions. The house that had once been a haven now felt like a prison. Each room echoed with the remnants of what used to be, a tapestry of memories now stained by betrayal and anger. I packed my belongings with a sense of finality, each item I folded or packed symbolizing the end of a chapter that had brought both joy and profound pain. Kim had tried to reach out one last time, her voice trembling with a mixture of regret and desperation. But I couldn't bring myself to answer her calls. There was nothing left to say, no apologies or explanations that could mend what had been irrevocably broken. Our relationship had disintegrated beyond repair, and I had made my decision. As I loaded the last of my things into the trunk of my car, I took one last look around the house. It was a place that had once been filled with laughter and love, but now it stood as a stark reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The walls seemed to close in, and I felt a profound sense of release as I closed the door behind me. Driving away from the house, I experienced a strange mix of emotions. There was a heavy weight in my chest, but it was accompanied by a sense of liberation. The city, once familiar and comforting, now seemed like a place I needed to leave behind. The memories of my time with Kim, both good and bad, had become a burden too heavy to bear. I journeyed out of town, heading toward a new beginning. The road stretched out before me, a symbol of the fresh start I was seeking. The familiar landmarks of my past faded into the distance as I drove, each mile bringing me closer to a life free from the pain and deceit that had marked my recent years. As the city lights dimmed behind me, I reflected on the choices I had made. The act of revenge had been both a necessity and a way of coping with the betrayal I had felt. I had used it to expose the truth, to deliver a kind of justice that I felt was required. But now, as I moved forward, I realized that the true purpose of my actions had been to free myself from the constraints of my past. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to navigate. I thought about the future, about the possibilities that awaited me and the chance to rebuild my life on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. The pain of the past will always be a part of me, but I was determined not to let it define my future. In the quiet moments of my drive, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I had accomplished what I set out to do, but at a great personal cost. The satisfaction came from knowing I had confronted the truth and taken control of my destiny. The sadness stemmed from the realization that the life I once knew was gone, and with it, a part of who I used to be. As dawn began to break and the first light of morning touched the horizon, I found solace in the simplicity of the new day. I was no longer a prisoner of my past, no longer bound by the ties of a relationship that had soured. I was moving forward, ready to embrace whatever came next with a sense of hope and renewal. I knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but it was a path I was ready to walk. The journey to self-discovery and healing had just begun, and I was prepared to face it with a newfound sense of freedom. In the end, leaving behind the lies and the pain was the first step toward finding a future where I could rebuild and reclaim my life. As the city disappeared, I took a deep breath and looked forward, ready to embrace the new chapter of my life, unburdened by the shadows of the past.